COVID crisis. As you all know, we've had a variant that has prolonged the crisis. I'm very proud of the work that the president is doing now to make sure that people have tests and masks, and hopefully more people will avail themselves of vaccinations. More therapies are in the works, and in terms of not having to have refrigeration of the kind that is almost impossible to have throughout the world. We salute our scientists for what they are doing. Science and governance, that's going to solve that problem. So for these and other reasons, whether it's broadband or clean water, as we know in the bipartisan, the first bill, the rescue package, was taking people out of poverty and money in pockets and all the rest, that was done with not one Republican vote. There were 13 Republican votes in the House to support the infrastructure bill, and we were happy that that was bipartisan, so we could repair roads and bridges, improve public transit, secure clean water, broadband, and much more across the country. So there's a great deal to be proud of. But as with all of this, we always keep an eye on what needs to be done to meet the kitchen table needs of the American people. What keeps them up at night? We want to help solve that problem. And one of the proud things about this administration is the creation of jobs, the expansion of health care, and again, the alleviation of poverty. So with that, then we go on to do next. There's no question, last night was a disappointment. I support what the president said. He's disappointed but not deterred. We will continue the work. We will follow the example of those who went before us in terms of the fight for civil rights and voting rights, not to be deterred. So the fight goes on. I had the privilege earlier this week, at the beginning of the week on Martin Luther King Day, to be with the King family, to be inspired over and over again, continue to be inspired by them, to the point of Martin Luther King's granddaughter, Yolanda, who's 13 years old in 8th grade, talking about the future, talking with her great wisdom about the future. So we're, again, always eager to do more, but nonetheless disappointed what happened. But I want to congratulate Leader Schumer for his courage, for how he proceeded with this legislation. You had to have a vote. And what was wonderful to see was for almost 2 days to hear the Democratic senators talk about the sanctity of the vote and how fundamental that is to our democracy. It was so inspiring. Sad, though, to hear the Republicans argue against the freedom to vote and protect our vote. Whatever the outcome, the fact is that every Democrat in the Senate voted for the Freedom to Vote / John Lewis Voter Advancement Act, and every Republican voted against it. The process in the Senate leaves much to be desired. If you want to talk about that, we can later. But the fact is that it was an inspiring day, and I salute the chairman for bringing that important legislation to the forefront as he brought it to the floor. And that's a way to get it into the forefront. It's so important. But again, my motto is, some of you have heard me say it, we don't agonize, we organize, and that's what we will do to, again, advance voter participation in our country. I was a former chair of the party, and our goal was to remove obstacles of participation for anyone, whatever their party was, to remove obstacles of participation. Instead of what the Republicans are doing is to put up obstacles of participation. So the fight for voting rights continues. We will not relent. The fight goes on. So where do we go from here? As we have been engaged in all of these highly visible fights, discussions, debates in the Congress, we have been working in many cases in a bipartisan way to advance legislation which should be coming to the floor in the months ahead as soon as we come to the agreement. First and foremost is the omnibus bill. I salute our chair, Rosa DeLauro, for the work that she is doing. This has to be bipartisan, and as an appropriator myself from way back, I always say, left to their own devices, the appropriators can get the job done, and we want to leave them to their own devices, and I hope that Mitch McConnell will leave them to their devices as well. We must get that done. It is important in terms of governance to get the appropriations bill done, the omnibus bill done, to fund the government. It is now a national security issue of the highest priority with the threats that exist out there. To go to a continuing resolution instead of a decision-making omnibus bill is to weaken our security and our stability. The Republicans should know that. So we hope that we will be able to bring that legislation to the floor before it expires. Honoring our pact. This is another security issue. It's about the burn pits. This is something that members have been working on for a while, and now, yesterday even, in fact, the Veterans Affairs Committee had Chairman Takano had a round table with the VSOs, the Veteran Service Organizations. We thank our veterans and our Veteran Services Organizations for their input on this. As you know, many of our service members were affected by being exposed to burn pits, and we have to have legislation passed. It will be expensive, but it's the price we must pay, that we owe our veterans to make sure they get the care and benefits that they deserve, those who are exposed to burn pits. And from our standpoint, if you were there, you qualify. We don't have to go through any torturous process to decide if somebody's illness depended on something that they were exposed to. That, very important legislation. Again, we're hoping all of this is bipartisan, the competitiveness bill. It has many names. It's about chips, about funding for chips. It's about research and development, very big piece of that coming out of our Science, Space, and Technology Committee under leadership of Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. It's about supply chain. It's pretty exciting, the competitiveness bill, and we're very close to being ready to go to conference with the Senate on that legislation. Postal reform, you've heard about it over and over again, but again, it's about fairness and making sure that we have fairness for our postal workers without having the retirement health benefits be pre-funded for 75 years.
We don't agonize, we organize, the mantra from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi this morning as Democrats fail to change the filibuster rules as Republicans block action on voting rights. She is trying to pivot, saying the fight for voting rights will continue, and take an opportunity to tout jobs in the past year. Rick Klein, our political director, bring you in as we follow her press conference here a day after a pretty long day on the Senate floor following all the debate. Speaker Pelosi, though, still saying we're going to move forward and not relent on voting rights. Rick?
Yeah, and Kira, what you're not hearing from Nancy Pelosi, or you didn't hear it from Vice President Harris this morning on Good Morning America, or from President Biden at the press conference last night, is a plan B, another option when it comes to addressing voting rights. Bitter disappointment in Pelosi's spin the day after. She says it was a necessary debate. She gave praise to Senate Democrats for pushing forward on it. She noted that all Senate Democrats voted for the underlying bill, but of course what they did not vote for was the rules change that would take to pass that bill. 2 senators held out on that last night, so the Democrats are left right where they started, without a substantive voting rights bill passing in this Congress, even as a number of states, 19 and counting, have passed newly restrictive voting laws. The main response has been really nothing at all from the Democrats in terms of bills, because they haven't been able to pass anything. That fact remains, and she talks about taking the case to voters, as President Biden did in his news conference yesterday, but that's different than changing the law.
Well, this is the 5th time that the bill was thwarted, right? And we knew what was coming pretty much yesterday. Yet when Chuck Schumer did step up and begin his remarks, he said, look, today is about the debate. He wants to see every single senator get on the record, whether they are for or against these bills. What do you think overall, the hours of debate that took place yesterday? We carried it all live here on ABC News Live. What was the point of that? Why was that so important to Democrats, even though they knew what they were facing?
For a moment, at least, they were able to galvanize and capture the national conversation. And I think that ultimately was all they could hope for out of this. I found it compelling to hear senators talk about their personal experiences, to engage and interact with each other, which is pretty rare in the Senate these days, to actually take a vote, even though the majority party knew that it was likely to fail, to go forward with that vote anyway. Pretty unusual. So even if they don't have a bill to show for it, to elevate it as a conversation, I think is important. And I think in terms of communicating with the base of voters that brought Biden to the White House that might feel a little disappointed with what they've seen over the last year, certainly voters of color are a big piece of the Biden coalition, to know that the Senate pushed as hard as it could, that leaders were on their side in pushing these bills, I think was an important signal to send.
You know, another high-stakes topic now, of course, is the situation with Russia, Ukraine, where U.S. Plays a part here. You know, the White House did clarify the president's comments on Ukraine, saying that any movement of Russian forces across Ukrainian border would be met with, quote, a swift, severe, and united response from the United States and our allies. But the president's words didn't go over, Rick, very well with Ukraine's president, who says on Twitter, and by the way, I just think it's so fascinating that all these world leaders now communicate on Twitter. It's so different from the way, you know, we grew up and paid attention to politics. But on Twitter, he says, we want to remind the great powers that there are no minor incursions and small nations, just as there are no minor casualties and little grief from the loss of loved ones. I say this as the president of a great power. Let's hold that thought. I'm told that Nancy Pelosi is taking questions now. Rick, let's see what the press has for Nancy Pelosi this morning. We'll come back to this.
That's right.
I wanted to give you a chance to talk about why you did not like it. That's important. And what you say to the members of your caucus, which range from frontline members to progressive members who want to go further and enact some sort of...
Well, I don't know that. I mean, that's your version. Here's the thing. I say to my members on a regular basis when we gather in caucus, and as you know, sometimes it's hybrid these days, but anytime we have gathered in caucus, one way or actually virtually or hybrid, I've said to them, under this roof, figuratively or actually, is the greatest collection of intellect, integrity, and imagination for doing the right thing for the American people. I have great confidence in the integrity of my members. They are remarkable. So when people talk about, well, somebody might do this and somebody, I think I trust our members. If, in fact, we should have severe penalties for delay in reporting on stock, then do that. I've said to the House Administration Committee, review all the bills that are coming in and see which ones, where the support is in our caucus. I think there are 2 letters, each has like 14 members signing it so far, maybe more will come, but that's what we have seen. But I do come down always in favor of trusting our members. Now, if the impression that is given by some that somebody's doing insider trading, that's a Justice Department issue. That's a Justice Department issue, and that has no place in any of this. But to give a blanket attitude of we can't do this and we can't do that because we can't be trusted, I just don't buy into that. But if members want to do that, I'm okay with that. I would add, and this is the last thing I'm going to say on this at this meeting, and I would add, do you know that the Supreme Court, now we in the House have disclosure, in the Congress we have disclosure, and we have the Stock Act, which says if you sell a stock, you have to report it in an X number of days, and if not, there's a penalty. Should those penalties be greater? Subject to review. I mean, I don't know why people don't do it on time, but whatever it is, if there's a penalty, and it should be more severe, so be it. But the United States Supreme Court, where decisions are made all the time that affect our environment, our workforce, our personal freedoms, every subject you can name, at the mercy of the court, our economic issues and the rest, no disclosure whatsoever, and certainly no Stock Act. I don't, in other words, if we're saying everybody should be living by the same standard, then so be it. That's okay with me. But I don't think that the court should be let off the hook. And even the Chief Justice said recently that the impression was that there were some scandals in judges making decisions that related in a way that wasn't right. So I say, when we go forward with anything, let's take the Supreme Court with us to have disclosure. No disclosure. The Supreme Court of the United States for life. No disclosure. And certainly, therefore, no Stock Act. Another subject?
Yeah, on the BBB, the president indicated yesterday chunks of it could get passed, and I'm sure you heard what he said. I wonder what you think of that statement. And I have a couple parts here. He said the child tax credit for community colleges might drop out. And just what should we expect when it comes to the BBB going forward?
Well, let me just say, chunks is an interesting word. The president has such a commitment to the values that are contained in this legislation, the reconciliation bill. When we passed when they were considering, and then later we passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the president said, I want to find as much common ground as I can in a bipartisan way when it comes to infrastructure. But I cannot limit my vision for America to what the Republicans will agree to in terms of roads and bridges, et cetera. That's important, but it's not all. So in this legislation, if we care about preserving the planet for future generations and clean air for them to breathe today and water to drink, we need to pass the reconciliation bill. So I would hope that that would be a major part of it. So what the president calls chunks, I would hope would be a major bill going forward. It may be more limited, but it is still significant. So we talked about climate. Now let's talk about health care. So important in the legislation is that millions more people will have access to health care at a very low cost because of what is in the bill in terms of expanding the Affordable Care Act. Let's now talk about child care. Child care in the bill, whether you're talking about the child tax credit, or you're talking about child care, or you're talking about home health care that might include a child, or an older sibling or a parent, or you're talking about universal pre-K. All of this lowers cost for care, and is transformative in the lives, especially of women in the workforce. So we have to have, if our economy is going to succeed, as you know, we say when women succeed, America succeeds. If we're going to have the full benefit of women and newcomers, and when I say newcomers, people of color who have not been in some of these traditional jobs to expand what that means, we have to have care at home, whether it's for children or, again, older siblings or parents. So there are big chunks of the bill that have to be contained in the bill. But remember this, that this is a reconciliation bill. So when people say, let's divide it up, they don't understand the process. What can we agree upon? And I'm sure that we can agree upon something significant. Call it a chunk if you want, but whatever you call it, we want it to be able to make a difference in transforming the workplace by honoring work, by respecting the fact that there are families that have to make decisions between home and work, and again, protecting the planet. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. Yeah. Yes, sir. Very disappointed.
But that says you have some numbers in the Democratic Party who are really taking on Senator and some senators. What do you say about those numbers who are hypercritical of them, taking their position, that's how they feel, that's what they think their position is? Do you think that that's fair to have that sort of criticism level from them in terms of the control?
Well, I think people will say what they're going to say. I have not encouraged that. In fact, I have discouraged it because we are a giant kaleidoscope here, Democrats and Republicans. You never know who's going to be in the design of the next bill. So we have to be respectful. But I've discouraged people from making comments about them. And you maybe hear it more than I do. I just don't hear that much of it anymore. No.
Do you think it's part of maybe get their vote down the road on this subject or something else?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that they'll do what they believe, and and I'm hopeful they have come to agreement on aspects of the Build Back Better legislation. We may want to have to rename it to something that's even Build Back Better than that kind, whatever we decide to call it. But the fact is that we're a diverse place, from right to left, Democrats to Republicans, within our own parties and the rest, and we have to be respectful. And I don't think there's any upside in Democrats criticizing Democrats. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit about what Democrats' 2022 legislative agenda should be beyond Build Back Better in order to kind of tell voters what you guys are actually doing, since there's been a lot of hurdles in front of both voting rights and Build Back Better?
Well, as I said earlier, right away, we have been working on legislation right now to keep government open in a way that meets the needs of the American people, that protects the security and stability of our country. And that is legislation that we hope will be on the floor in a short period of time, and I thank Rosa DeLauro for that. A high priority for us is to honor the pact, to make sure that our men and women in uniform who were exposed to burn pits understand that this is of the highest priority for us. It's going to be very costly. But it's worth it because we owe them. They were exposed in the line of duty to dangerous situations where they now have serious health issues and they need care and benefits. I mentioned also the issue that relates to competitiveness. This is really important for us in terms of chips and what that means to our manufacturing base, in terms of supply chain, what that means to our economy, and research, which means to our present and to our future. These are big. All of these are big bills. The $1.5 trillion for the omnibus bill, probably over $500 billion for the burn pits. We don't know. We're waiting for further CBO scores on that. And then in terms of the Competes Act, that's $50 billion for chips, another $40 billion perhaps for supply chain, and the rest of these are significant bills that contain, especially the omnibus and the competitiveness bills, they're bills that contain large numbers of other bills. But they are the vehicle that will take us forward under the title of competitiveness. Was it called in the Senate? USICA in the Senate, and we call it competitiveness bill here. Whatever the title, we hope to go to conference on that soon. And then there are other bills that relate to the Postal Service and the rest, again, about governance. But we have always been about America's working families. So we still want to pass a legislation that expands our workforce by recognizing the responsibilities that people have at home, which I address. So I went over some that are in the near future. We have three task force that work, select committee task force, that are not legislative committees but will make recommendations. One of them is the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and much of what they have recommended is in the current version of the BBB. We hope that most of that survives, but that isn't the end of it. There'll be other opportunities, shall we say, that we will have to help other countries to save the planet as well. So nothing is the end game, but it takes us well down the path. In terms of the Select, and that's chaired by Kathy Castor of Florida. She's doing a superlative job. Next, we have the Select Committee on COVID, under the leadership of Mr. Clyburn, our distinguished whip, and they are doing very important work that helps us make judgments about what has worked better or what in terms of how we go forward in terms of this pandemic, but any future ones as well. And then we have a Select Committee on Disparity and Income and Opportunity in our country, chaired by Mr. Himes. And you'll see much more of that now that we've gotten through some of the hopefully soon some of the big legislation coming out of the last year, and that is how we affect legislation to end that disparity of opportunity in our country. The fact that during the COVID crisis, wealth increased at the high end to such an exorbitant place at the expense of people not, I don't want to say at the low end, but at a lower economic place in our society. We can't have that continue. That's what is a caste system. That's not a democracy. The middle class is the backbone of our democracy. We have to strengthen the middle class and all who aspire to it. So that is what our legislation is about. So how we protect our nation, how we preserve our planet, how we transform our workforce, how we educate our children. My whole mission in Congress is about the children, for the children. As you heard me say, you're in the arena, you have to be prepared to take a punch, you have to be prepared to throw a punch for the children. And so we'll be dealing with issues that relate to antitrust and to Section 230 and what damage that does.
Majority Leader Nancy Pelosi there with her weekly press conference. I'm getting word that Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy getting ready to start his press conference as well with fellow GOP leaders around his side there. We'll take that in just a moment as soon as McCarthy starts speaking. Rick Klein, you still with me? Actually, it looks like they have begun. Let's go ahead and take you live now, the GOP leaders and Kevin McCarthy.
An energy crisis, a border crisis, an education crisis, a crime crisis, a worsening COVID-19 crisis, and a national security crisis. These crises are a direct result of the failed leadership and the far-left socialist agenda of Joe Biden and congressional Democrats. In Biden's economic crisis, wages have decreased 8 out of the 11 months since he took office, and inflation has skyrocketed, with 2021 being the worst year for inflation since 1981, before I was born, which makes my colleagues laugh and makes them feel older. Democrats have also enacted an anti-energy agenda that has caused energy prices to skyrocket, raising the national average for a gallon of gas to the highest price since 2014. Under Joe Biden's failed leadership, remote learning for many students is becoming the new normal. Failing to deliver on his promise to reopen schools in his first 100 days, Joe Biden and his administration are leaving kids behind. Joe Biden also promised to shut down the virus. House Democrats once again failed, and Americans are struggling to find tests as the pandemic worsens. This month, the U.S. broke the record for the most COVID hospitalizations at over 132,000, and more Americans died from COVID-19 in 2021 than 2020. Following a year of defunding the police rhetoric from President Biden and congressional Democrats, we saw a crime crisis and over a dozen major U.S. cities seeing record high homicide rates in 2021. And the border crisis continues to rage and worsen, with over 1.8 million illegal immigrants apprehended at our southern border since Joe Biden took office. And of course, President Biden's weakness on the world stage has left us with a national security crisis that has made our adversaries in Beijing, Tehran, and Moscow stronger today than they were 1 year ago. Joining me today are my colleagues from the House Republican Conference, and I will turn it over to Jody Arrington from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And by the way, I was only 9 years old when we had that 40 cents. We're flaunting our youth and vigor this morning. Thank you all for being here. The best way to describe President Biden's first year in office is one self-inflicted crisis and disaster after another. From chaos at the southern border to rampant crime throughout our cities, from the botched withdrawal in Afghanistan to a bungled COVID response. Unfortunately, Biden's economic policies and recovery plan has been no exception, characterized by incompetence, incoherence, and irrational policy decisions, and the results have been devastating for our country. In the months after COVID hit our shores, we all worked together with our Democrat colleagues to pass legislation and provide relief to our fellow Americans, our fellow families that were struggling, and our small businesses and the frontline workers. Despite campaign promises from President Biden, he broke from this bipartisanship and jammed through the largest multi-trillion-dollar partisan spending bill in the nation's history. Disguised as COVID relief, when the vast majority